All right, let's dive into a topic that affects all of us, authority. We run into it everywhere, right? At work, in our families, in society. But what happens when those different authorities start telling you to do opposite things?
I mean, it's a classic dilemma. Your boss wants one thing, the law is telling you to do another, and then you've got that little voice inside, your conscience, saying something totally different. So, how do you possibly decide which one to follow?
Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack a framework from several theological sources that suggests a really clear hierarchy. Think of it like a ladder of authority, specifically designed to bring clarity to those messy situations. We're going to break down how these texts structure authority from the absolute top all the way down to our day-to-day lives. But first, before we even start climbing that ladder, we have to ask, what exactly is authority according to these sources? And why do they say it's such a fundamental, universal principle? So, the Topical Encyclopedia of the Bible defines authority as this foundational power, both divine and human, that basically creates order. From this perspective, it's the very structure that holds everything together: society, family, even the cosmos. And check this out, the writer Watchman Nee takes this idea to a whole other level. He argues that rebelling against authority isn't just, breaking a rule. He says it's violating a core principle of the entire universe. He actually traces this idea all the way back to the fall of Satan, saying it wasn't about sin, it was a rebellion against the very principle of God's authority. Okay, so let's head to the very top of the ladder and see how this whole framework is built, starting from its absolute highest point. This is where, according to these sources, ultimate authority comes from. At the very peak, level 1, we have what Pastor Rick Godwin calls sovereign authority. This authority belongs to God and God alone, simply as the creator of everything. It's absolute, it's ultimate, and no human can ever claim it. Right underneath that, you've got level 2, veracious authority. And that's just a fancy way of saying the authority of truth. For a believer, this truth is seen as being perfectly captured in the scriptures. And I love how Pastor Godwin just puts it so bluntly: Scripture outranks everybody. What that means in this framework is that no human being, not a pastor, not a CEO, not a politician, has the right to tell you to do something that clearly violates a command from Scripture. Okay, but let's be real for a second. The Scriptures don't have a specific command for every single decision we have to make in the 21st century. And that brings us to the third level of authority, which is a really personal one. And this is what Pastor Godwin calls, and I quote, the most liberating thing. It's the authority of your own conscience. You can think of it as your personal internal compass for navigating all the gray areas in life. Now, this is a crucial point. Where the scripture is silent, your conscience becomes the ruling authority for your personal choices. In those gray areas, if you go against your own conscience, it's considered a sin for you. But, and this part is key, you don't get to then impose that personal conviction on somebody else. Godwin uses this to make a really powerful distinction. He says a lot of conflicts in communities happen when people start treating their personal preferences, like music styles or what they eat, as if they were binding moral opinions. This framework really tries to separate what can be argued as right or wrong versus what's just a matter of personal taste. All right, so we've looked at the divine, we've looked at the personal. Now let's come down the ladder a bit and see how this framework deals with all the human authorities we bump into every single day. According to Godwin, there's a fundamental rule that applies to all human authority. Authority never, ever extends beyond responsibility. It's simple. If you want authority in some area, you have to take responsibility for it first. No responsibility, no authority, period. This leads us right to level 4. Delegated authority. This is where a higher power gives someone temporary responsibility, which gives them temporary authority in a very specific context. The perfect example is a babysitter. They have authority over the kids, but only because the parents, the higher authority, delegated it to them for that specific night. Now, the last 3 levels are even more situational. You've got stipulative authority, think of the binding terms in a legal contract that you signed. Then you've got the authority of custom, like the social expectation to be quiet in a library. And finally, there's functional authority, and this one is all about skill. To make this idea of functional authority crystal clear, Godwin gives this fantastic example of a car crash. So at the scene of an accident, who's in charge? Well, it depends on the function. The person with the most relevant skill has the authority. The doctor has authority over the injured people, the mechanic has authority over the wrecked cars, and the police officer has authority over the legal stuff. A religious leader who doesn't have any of those skills has no functional authority in that specific moment.
Okay, so we've got these 7 levels, but how do they all fit together? This is where the golden rule of the whole hierarchy comes in. And it's pretty simple. A higher level of authority always overrules a lower one.
So let's say a human authority, like a government or your boss, which fall under that delegated category, gives you an order. This framework would argue that while you're supposed to respect that authority, your obedience is conditional. It's not absolute. And the verse that's held up as the ultimate tiebreaker here is this one from the biblical book of Acts. When a lower, human authority, say a new law, contradicts a higher, divine one, like a clear command in Scripture, the higher authority has to be obeyed, even if it comes with a personal cost. So when you pull it all together, you get this really clear, tiered structure. At the very top, you have the divine levels. Right in the middle is the personal level of your own conscience. And then at the bottom, you have all these different situational, worldly authorities. The whole thing is designed to bring some order to really complex decisions. So at the end of the day, what's all this for? Well, this whole framework is really presented as a practical tool. It's a mental ladder you can use when you're facing all these competing voices of authority, helping you decide who you should listen to when those commands are in conflict. And that really just leaves us with a final question to think about, for you personally. When all those different voices of authority start clashing in your own life, what kind of framework do you use to decide which one you're going to follow?